Welcome, guys, to another podcast. And today we are talking about cars and bikes, the fundamentals of them, some of the advantages, some of the disadvantages. So let's get into it. Okay, guys, so a quick background on our experience with both cars and bikes. Obviously, Cameron and I have been driving for a long time now. I think I've been driving for coming up to 6 years and Cameron coming up to 5 years. Is that correct, Cam?
5.5, bro. I'm not that much younger than you.
5.5, 5.5. Okay. And I've got my full bike license back in August 2019. So that makes me just a little over a year on a bike on two wheels. So that's where we all came from. I mean, I got my a 650 Honda, which you've seen on the channel. And at the moment, Cameron, you're driving.
Well, my 520D that you hopefully have seen on the channel as well. I have had a few cars before that. Alex has had probably about 75 cars by this point.
I mean,
she can't keep one for more than a month.
Yeah, I've had a few cars over the years.
A few.
I think I'm on. I think I've lost count really now. I think I'm in the 23s or 24s.
It's more than that. It was like 20 when we counted 2 or 3 years ago.
I mean, if you count the HudRod cars, then it's going up a little bit. But you know, let's not go into that love story. So let's start off with the fundamentals of cars and bikes, and let's start. I suppose we can start with the basics, and you can tell them what's so great about a car, Cameron.
Well, as obviously we're doing as comparison to bikes, we'll keep it as pretty much the differences between the two. So the main obviously thing with a car is that it's generally more comfortable, it's quiet, it's got aircon in the summer, it's got heat in the winter. You can have multiple people there easily. You can have luggage and all this sort of stuff. So they're just a lot more practical and usable. And for your average person who doesn't want to get cold or have a loud engine blast in their ears, it's obviously quite an obvious choice why you'd go for a car. But they are obviously a lot more heavy and a bit worse on fuel and things like that. So they're not absolutely perfect. But it's all the sort of the luxury items that come with a car, which I think is why still, 90% of people on the road still have a car.
Well, I mean, I think the actual invention of a car is amazing as a thing, and I definitely think it's ahead of the motorcycle in that respect. But I do think obviously there's huge benefits to motorcycles, possibly more where I live. Living in London, the traffic recently has got increasingly worse, and going into London can take me to do 4 miles. Well, especially coming back from work at around 6 o'clock, it could take me up to, I think the worst record I got was about an hour and a half. And doing that every day really drinks fuel in a car, and it's really boring in a car as well. So I got onto the bike, and I've never looked back really. Well, I mean, I've got both still, don't I? So
yeah, but it's just a waste of time.
Yeah.
Why would you want to sit in traffic for like an hour when it's literally 3 miles? It just doesn't make any sense in London.
Well, exactly. That was it. I mean, I couldn't deal with it anymore. Of just sitting there doing nothing, and I could see these bikes going past me, and for a 4 mile commute, it's really not that uncomfortable. But alongside that, I before was never into bikes at all, just simply because my dad was always against me getting a bike because he was scared of what was to happen if I did get a bike. And
rightly enough,
yeah. And I eventually convinced him, or we convinced ourselves, because I was just wasting so much money on petrol and fuel getting into London. But also, what comes with bikes is you get a lot for your money. You get a lot of speed. Obviously, that's probably one of the biggest aspects for a lot of people. although they're not practical in carrying stuff, they are practical at getting around. If you're just looking to get somewhere, and you've got a scooter, for example. Now, some people might not say scooters are pretty cool, but if you actually look at scooters themselves, they're used all over Europe for a very good reason. If you want to just get somewhere, go down to your shop, go down to wherever, you put £10 or 10 litres of fuel in that. If that, some of them barely take even 6 litres of fuel. That will get you around for a week easily, possibly longer, depending on how many trips you do. You know, these things do like 120 miles per gallon.
Yeah,
And
the
in that way, they're very practical.
the cost factor, I think, is actually quite a big point of it. And I think, especially if you look towards, let's say, the Asian countries, such as Indonesia, they're massive on bikes out there because it's more easy for them to afford it. Because the big international things are quite difficult then due to the value of their currency. So things like that is very good. But obviously, coming back to the UK, as you say, your bike was, as well, we'll link in the description the review of your bike. But one thing that we said in there was, for £3,000, you're basically getting like the fastest car that you would need on the road performance for £3,000.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
very good bang for the buck.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting to 60 in under 4 seconds, which, if you look into cars, unless it's track day monsters, which are pretty much bikes with extra wheels, or expensive supercars, you're not going to be getting under 4 seconds to 60. Realistically, some of the new cars obviously now have 4-wheel drive and ridiculous amounts of power in your normal sedans, but you're still going to have to spend over £100,000 for that stuff, unless it's a track toy.
Yeah, it was quite incredible the first time I was following you on the bike, and in front of me you just did a little pull away, and just seeing you like go away in the distance, it was unreal. Like, I didn't respect how quick that was, even just for a so-called normal bike. It was it was quite interesting, the performance that you get, because people go around. I mean, like, even Tom with his Type R, he thinks that's like quick enough, and then your bike is probably twice.
It is.
But then your bike is like twice as quick as that for less money than what he paid for his Type R.
Well, yeah, obviously it's just power to weight, which is why bikes are so economical. Even my bike, when I went out with Tom the other day, I returned 56 to the gallon.
Ooh, that's nice.
So that's not trying at all.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think of power to weight ratios, obviously to get a car with the same sort of power to weight ratio, it's very, very difficult. But obviously they do have their disadvantages as well. As much as I like to toot their own horn, there's no getting away from the fact that even if I'm safe myself, half of the problem being on a bike is everyone else on the road is trying to get them to see you and trying to make sure you don't get hit by anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that in general, just about car driving as well. Like, so many times on the road, you think, even just the little things, you think, oh, I have to avoid someone, like just changing lanes or cutting in or something like that. But on a bike, those things are even more critical. Because obviously in a car, you could just like crunch your fender or whatever, like whoopee-doo, you have to get a new bit of metal, cool. But on a bike, if you get hit, you're going off and you're sliding down the road. So it's a lot.
Yeah, that's or crunching a leg, stuff like that. Yeah.
Or even worse, your bones. So it's a lot. Yeah, you're putting a lot more trust into other people, and I think that's why you did a good job getting a big yellow bike.
Yeah. I mean, I did. I know some people might not think it's safe, but I did try and make it kind of safe. I thought yellow, you obviously might be seen a little bit more, and ABS and this and that. But fundamentally, something I've always said to you, Cameron, is certainly when I got my bike and I got my bike license, and you realise this when you sit behind me, is I'm much more attentive to what's going on the road, especially with what's happening in front of me, and I'm always trying to look so far ahead, as I did in the car before, but even more so on a bike, and it does make me a better driver. And also in that way, I always say to you, yes, a bike is dangerous, but if you're going at the speed limit, maybe not so much with a scooter, because a scooter is a little bit less powerful, a little bit slower, not as much grip as such. But it's certainly any bike, anything above 300cc is going to be, if you're sitting at the speed limit, it's going to be able to brake from the speed limit very quickly. And modern tyres are so good that yes, it's dangerous, but if you're sensible, it's like anything. A Ferrari's dangerous in the same way.
Yeah, well, indeed, and as long as you're riding, I should say, not like a maniac, then you should be okay. I think one thing, okay, you always, when it ends up being on a YouTube video or whatever, it's always like the most extreme bad situation. But if you just find some of these people on bikes that have these crashes, they're just being stupid. They're just pushing way too much or going way too quick on a normal just street with traffic and this sort of stuff. And you get people who in the traffic jam just like slide down the middle of the lanes, filtering. But then obviously a car from one lane wants to move into another lane. And as a driver, you can't see it coming. You literally cannot see it. So there is certain limits to like how quick then the bike should be going. But often people do go a little bit silly. But you, when I've been following you, you are generally quite safe on it. And one thing that you found when you were trying to film some onboard footage was that you couldn't actually talk because you were so busy concentrating, which is a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not so much concentrating. It's just you analyze everything to try and prevent everything. I'm always, even when I'm driving, I prefer just to not have a crash. I don't like being all ego or something. And if I've got the right of way and someone cuts me up, I'm not just going to go into them. And it's with a bike. What you were saying on the filtering aspect, there's a reason filtering's legal and lane splitting is not legal. And that is simply because lane splitting, it should be illegal. It is silly. Splitting through lanes when traffic's going 70 miles an hour, it's just not a bright idea. But filtering is when you're going slowly, obviously, and you're going no faster than 10 kilometers or 10 miles an hour faster than the traffic. And I do find when you're moving yourself towards the front all the time, you are kind of paying attention to what's going on. And in some ways, it's a good advert for bikes. It's a good advert, if you see bikes going past you, then you're like, oh, maybe I should get on a bike, because I certainly think it's way better than public transport, especially in London. But the other thing, the problem with car drivers and what car drivers have, I wouldn't say so much you, because you've got quite a logical mind, but some people that are on the road, is that if I'm not going anywhere, you can't go anywhere.
Yeah, that's just going into human psychology a little bit.
That's
quite a deep point. But yeah, I say with push bikes as well. Now, it's sort of one of those things where some people let the whole thing down. I think there are definitely some people on, obviously this podcast mainly about motorbikes, but motorbikes and push bikes who both let the side down as such, because as soon as you get a few of them acting like a bit of a dick, then naturally, as a driver of a car, you're going to think that all of them are like dicks. But I think it's also because it takes a certain type of person to get on a bike. I don't know why. It's just sort of a lot of people you see on the bikes are more like the boy racer kind of, especially when you see younger people. It's like the boy race kind of thing. Think, oh yeah, I'm going to get on a bike because it's so fast. And I mean, yeah, that's cool. But then if you put yourself and others in danger and you're acting like a tit, then that doesn't really help too much. So I think that does end up being why drivers get a bit angry and a bit beefed up.
Yeah, it does tend to be some of the younger guys. As always with all these things, we were all there once. But if you gave me a Golf R when I was 17 years old, I'd probably be pretty silly with it.
Yes,
it all goes the same way. But on that fact, I mean, if you had a like I said about the Ferrari, if you had the Ferrari at the speed limit, it'd be the safest car on the road, because it's got massive stopping power, massive acceleration to get away from everything, and it's kind of the sort of same. Is that the fact that a bike is so cheap? You can pay 20 grand and you can go 9-second quarter miles, or 10-second quarter miles, and that sort of pace and acceleration for 20 grand, some people just don't respect it. They don't
Yes.
respect what they've got under them.
And that's a very good point, because cars are way more forgiving for that sort of stuff. Okay, yes, you can still have bad accidents in cars, but there's generally a lot more forgiveness in going a little bit over the limit. Whereas, obviously, on a bike, you can very easily, because the acceleration is so quick, if you don't really know what you're doing, you can get out of hand and be going way too fast very quickly. I mean, even you say it yourself sometimes when you're trying to have a bit of fun, then you're like, oh shit, no, this is way too fast for the situation. But it takes a certain type of mindset to be able to step back and get out of the sort of ego of it, where you think you're the coolest thing on the road because you're being so fast.
Well, I mean, that's it. I mean, you can. There's so many things that happen on a bike when you come up to a corner, or when you have to do certain things. That a car is very forgiving in the fact that you're not going to fall over or fall off. Whereas you've got to keep your mindset on going around the corner and not thinking about falling off, or not thinking about going into the tree, or stuff like this, where on a bike on a car you don't have that process of, oh, if I get this wrong, something can go wrong, and that freaks people out. In the same way, you go barreling into a corner at 100 miles an hour, and even if you maybe could make it round it, you're already thinking about how you're not going to make it round it.
Yeah,
Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, you have a lot more of your human survival instincts playing against you. In a car, you naturally feel a bit more safe because you're literally like cushioned and cocooned in this thing. Whereas on a bike, you're on top of it, and you can very easily not be on top of it. So yeah, I think So I think the respect thing is a very good point. You have to have a lot more respect to be on a bike, because you're naturally going to be on a faster bike than what you probably would if you had a car, an equivalent car.
Definitely.
Because you wouldn't have that sort of pace car, would you? Like right now.
No. I mean, it's very humbling. It's very humbling.
Your point that you made earlier is quite a good one, though. A positive because of that. Because bikes are a lot more nippy, let's say, than a car in a certain situation. And you said about getting yourself out of a situation. That is the best thing for bikes to do. Sometimes, especially when you're just going on an A road or something, you realize that you've just been sitting in someone's blind spot way too long. Like you didn't intend to do it. It's just the way the flow of the traffic was, or whatever, or you just weren't 110% concentrating. And sometimes you just have to floor it and just get out of that situation.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter if you go like 5 or 10 over the speed limit to do it. You just got to get out of there because it's the safest thing for all involved. And sometimes you have to do it in a car as well, but especially on a bike, when I've been with you, like driving next to you, I've noticed you have to do it a few times. And I think that is a big benefit of that. It's a lot easier to just simply get out of a situation, because you can just be half a mile up the road, in a few seconds if you really, really wanted to.
Yeah. And that's it for me as well. When I got my bike, yes, it was a faster bike, but I wanted to use the bike on the motorway as well, and different things like that. And having a faster bike, being able to get out of the situations is preventing yourself being in the situation in the first place. So obviously, as they always say, if you can read it, what's going to happen first, it's much easier to prevent something if you know it's going to happen, or it could happen. So just staying out of a blind spot is a perfect example you brought up there. Is if a guy can't see you, why stay there? You've got to move out the way. You've got to move into somewhere else. And most of the time on a bike, you can look behind you, but looking in your mirrors, sometimes you can see the exit. You can see an escape straight in front of you. So having that power just to get out of everyone's way is really, really good to have, because obviously braking, then you're also relying on someone behind you to brake as well. So having the power to get out and look where you want to go to get into safety is really good.
And a similar point to that is you can actually help the drivers because of first of all, the colour of your bike. Also the sound. Like you can hear when there's a bike around you most of the time, which makes you a little bit more aware. Whereas you kind of get comfortable with cars being around you as a driver. You sort of also just assume what they're going to be doing because of the certain type of road or the certain situation on the road that you're doing. Like I find when I'm coming to a stop, say it's just a road, you come up to a T junction, obviously you're just going to naturally stop. Obviously you do the whole mirror signal maneuver thing, but when you see the guy behind you, you just kind of assume they're going to brake, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But I think when you're on a bike, you can't have that sort of assumption.
No, not at all.
You have to be a lot more aware of things like that, and have a bit more, well, I guess awareness, but a bit more understanding of the potential dangers of a situation.
Yeah, and that's something that's potentially kind of not thought about is every time you go to brake in a bike or when you're in your test, you would be checking your mirrors, or they ask you to check your mirrors, just to see if anything's happening behind you. Especially if you were, say, for example, on the motorway and you had an Arctic lorry behind you. You're just chilling in the slow lane, or whatever you're doing, and then the traffic stops in front of you. You're going to be able to stop so much faster than that Arctic lorry. So that's something, and in a car, it's bad news if you've got an Arctic lorry. In a bike, well, there's no chance. So, pulling over to the hard shoulder, or doing something like that. Something you always have to be aware on a bike is where you're going to be in the road into relations of what's happening. So even stopping at some lights, if the lights go amber, that's a scary situation on a bike, because if the guy behind you is trying to make it, you don't want to stop.
But again, sometimes that's well, going back to the previous point, is getting out of a situation. On a bike, you would easily be able to just bump down 2 gears and go through it. Obviously, we're not telling anybody to jump through red lights, so that sort of stuff, because it obviously depends on the situation. But if it's literally just turned yellow and you're just at the point where you could or should be braking, if it was red, sometimes it's easier just to just floor it and go. And obviously, as I said, depends on the situation, but sometimes that is the safer option. So you do have to just be a bit more aware. But I think
even on that point, just quickly, you still be scared in the car. Sometimes when you have to stop in at a 40-mile-an-hour road and the lights do go red, with so many people on their phones, you're scared of what's behind you.
What I always do as a driver in that situation is I always leave myself room to let off the brake. So I will always brake, not obviously emergency stop, but I always brake a little bit harder initially, and then I'll check to see if they've noticed, kind of thing. Obviously, I mean, I know I do it, but I couldn't tell you how I do it, because you just naturally flick into the mirrors. But then I always see, what they're going to do. Because I actually saw this. Someone ran into the back of me last summer, just sort of in a stop-start situation, going through some lights. And basically what happened was, we went through one light, then it was about 200 meters to the next light. And I sort of... I don't know if it was a situation where I went to yellow or whatever, but I sort of went through, and he obviously was being a bit impatient, and he sort of went through the light. And obviously then when we came to braking, he was obviously not completely concentrating, but I literally saw this in my mirror. It's just I had nowhere to go in front of me in this situation, so I couldn't really do anything. But I was literally looking in my mirror as he hit me. Fortunately, the speed difference was very slow. So there was literally no damage to my car or his, thankfully. Very lucky situation. But it's just things like that. You've got to be careful, more careful, I should say, on a bike, because had you hit the back of a bike, you'd be on the floor, potentially into the car ahead of you. Whereas I had the tiniest scratch on my bumper, and that was it.
Well, even bikes can be pretty heavy, and if you're not wearing proper leg gear protecting yourself, or boots, just dropping the bike on your leg can be extremely painful and extremely damaging. And that's another thing. If anyone that is in a car is watching this, if you get upset about bikes lane filtering, in its own way, it's safer for us to lane filter, because then we are not going to be stopped pinched between two cars. We'll be out to the side filtering through the traffic. So it's in its own way safe, because of that.
Going back to the fundamentals that we had at the beginning, something we didn't really mention is on a bike is all the equipment. Like, if you're going to do it properly, you're going to need some proper, I guess, jeans, I guess you would say, but actual ones that protect you. You need potentially special shoes. You need especially a proper jacket with like the I don't know what you'd call it, but like the spine.
Yeah. I mean,
splint.
I'd go on it. I'll go on to this point because it's actually something I wanted to move on to anyway. Yes, I paid 3,000 for my bike, and it's still cheap. But what I'd like to say now, people say, oh yeah, you can do this cheaper. You can get the cheaper helmets. You can get the cheaper stuff like this. Personally, I think that's not the right way to do it. I think easily you can spend £1,000 on gear. To have good gear, you spend your £200-300 on a jacket, you spend £200 on your trousers, that's already £500, and the helmet all day long is going to cost you £400-300 for a decent showy or something that you'd want to wrap your head in, to have the nice ventilation, things you don't think about in a car. You don't want to be cold in your helmet, you don't want to be hot in your helmet, you want to all of these kind of things. You want to get good quality stuff to wrap yourself around in, that was going to protect you.
Yeah. Whereas in a car, you can literally drive in your t-shirt. Shorts.
Exactly. And that is one beauty of it. Yes, the bike did save me time, but it was a bit of a pain in the arse every time having to go into gear to get to work. But obviously, you need to do it. And moving on to that point, when I went for a drive with Tom the other day, I'd already committed to the drive and I didn't want to let him down. But it was all foggy and it was freezing cold, which obviously he was just in shorts and I was in 5 layers of clothes plus motorcycle gear on top of that, just trying to keep myself warm. And that is moving on to some of the disadvantages of bikes. Yes, they're quicker to get around, but some of the fun in bikes is the challenge of going places, because it can be quite difficult. Going on the motorway, you've got wind noise, which is way louder than you actually think it is, and pretty bad for your hearing. And many of other factors such as weather, being too cold, being too hot, all of these things that don't really come into it in a car at all.
Yeah, the conditions have to be a bit more settled. So if you remember a couple of times, like this time last year, after work, we'd go and, get pizza or whatever. But then you'd always have to be thinking, where am I parking the bike? Where am I going to be locking it up?
Big point. I can't even think about.
And then when we went and had the pizza, you had to have like your helmet and all your gear stuff like just on the seat next to you. Whereas I just rocked up, put the key in my pocket, and that was it.
That is a huge thing. I mean, it's not like cars don't get stolen, because obviously some pricey ones do, but nothing like bikes. I mean, if you're not locking up your bike, it's just such an easy thing to steal. When I used to work at Honda, bikes would get stolen from outside, outside a garage. So
yeah, literally
these
out the front,
guys out the front. So they can get stolen anyway. They just take off your steering lock, and then they use another bike to push that bike along, and then they're gone. And it's just so much easier to access and steal a bike than it is a car. And that is another thing that's very annoying, especially if you're like me and you're going into London, is finding somewhere to park the thing, and then you've got to carry all your gear with it. It is a bit annoying. So that brings me back to, yes, there's some advantages, but yes, there's some disadvantages, and that's possibly, I think, why you're not so interested, because for you it really just doesn't make any sense. And I'd say in the only way it would make sense for you is because bikes are fun. They do give you a lot more connection or more stuff to think about when you are riding them on the road, which I think cars are just a bit easy. But for you, it doesn't really make sense, does it?
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, I'm far enough outside of London that it doesn't affect me traffic-wise. It wouldn't help me For instance, for my commute, because I wouldn't actually have anywhere sort of safe to put the bike where I work anyway. So it's a lot easier for me just to park the car on the street, but I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable leaving my bike there. So yeah, I guess those are the sort of things you have to weigh up. I mean, where for instance, if you're going into Harrington's, obviously there's like the showrooms and that sort of stuff that you could put it in, and it would sort of be more safe there. So that sort of makes sense. Or if wherever else you're going, it would make sense. But for me, just like, or in a situation where you sort of like parking on the street and that sort of stuff, like, personally, I don't really feel comfortable enough to do that. Also, then again, I would have all my gear and all my helmet to put somewhere, and this sort of stuff. It just makes it a little bit more awkward. But again, that depends on the type of commute you're doing and that sort of stuff. But from a fun factor that you were mentioning,
that's something you haven't tried yet,
this
is actually
it's
something. Yeah. This is something I'd actually just kind of come to my mind now. I'd like to say, just because of, especially with some of the cars we drive, they're made to be much more mundane and, dare I say, a little bit more boring for your average guy. Even some of the roadsters. Whereas I'd like to think some of the bikes are still a bit old school. They're a little bit further behind. Some ABS has not come into law till a lot later. Traction control is still not on all bikes. I mean, my bike doesn't have traction control. And I'd like to say, if it was a weekend toy, I think a bike makes a very good option as a weekend toy.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Especially for the price. Because we were talking about this with the Z4 review that we did. And whether it's worth spending 12 grand on a weekend toy. Whereas a bike, well, for instance, yours is 3, and that's starting to be, reasonable, because it's not just money sitting in the garage.
Yes, yeah, and that's the sort of thing that will keep it special as well. You have a special toy in the weekend. That's one thing we said on the Z4 review, is that the Z4 was perfect to drive every day if you wanted a roadster every day. But a roadster, I'd like to say, is more of the toy cars and your kit cars, but kit cars are pretty expensive nowadays. As a weekend toy, I mean, a bike is a great way to go. You get more often than not, you get a really crazy high revving engine, or a great sounding engine, and loads of speed. And if you wanted to go on a trip or whatever, it'll be special to you because you better use it on your day-to-day commute. You use your commuting car.
Yeah. That's the point, and I think that's one reason why you got bored of your bike a little bit, because you literally drove it every single day for a year.
Yeah, and in that way, I think that's what the bike was for. It was for commuting, was my main part of it, and I think I made the right decision buying that kind of bike, not buying something that's too crazy and special, because I don't want it to get stolen. I don't want this to happen. I don't want that to happen. But yes, as a toy, I think they make a much better argument than a lot of cars, because cars can, I mean, even just for example, the R-Cord, which is not crazy yet, but we're going to be using that for more special things. We don't really use it as a daily car, and we have to do a lot to that to make it special as such,
which the bike just gets straight away. Yeah, it is a difficult choice between the two. I mean, most people have more of a reference on cars, because even most of the bike people that we know have cars. So it's not there aren't too many people out there who are like bike exclusive. I'm sure there are a few, and fair play to you. But on a daily basis, that where you're trying to be sort of comfortable and practical, I don't really know if that's really going to be the way that you're going to want to go about it. For instance, with my car, I just jump in, turn it on, drive away, it's all comfortable, and that's it. And if I need to take something in the boot, I just put something in the boot, and it could be quite big. I wouldn't want to have the extra thought process on, I need to take this regarding like special equipment. Being like, I don't need to take my helmet and all this sort of stuff. And then one day, of course, you're just going to forget your special boots or whatever, and then that gets a bit sketchy. So it's just too much more to think about, and just in general less practical.
Well, I mean that's it. I think to summarise, really, they are making a lot more sense in London now, especially if you're going to go down the scooter route. And a lot of people don't have a car or a bike and use public transport, and that's where I definitely implore people to give a scooter a go as such. And I mean, you can do a lot on a bike and you can use it exclusively, but there's just some things you cannot do on a bike, and you can pretty much do everything in a car. You can go and take it shopping, you can be warm, you can go on a road trip, you can sleep in it, you can do all sorts of things. A bike, especially some of the more leery ones, I think are definitely a hobby or a toy, and using them every day is not quite as simple.
Well, yeah, indeed, and that's I think one reason why cars are still the main factor on the roads. You know, we said this so many times when just driving around London. Just like, why aren't half these guys on bikes? The car, you'd literally get like 5 times as many people in the same space on the road because the cars are so big, and it's just easier, quicker, cheaper to get about. But for most people, it's just not the so-called faff that they want to do, and that pretty much summarizes it for the car guy point of view. It's just a little bit too much extra work and impracticality for the fun that you get, at least from the car guy's view. So what do you think from the biker's view?
I think from a biker's view, there's well, it having ridden on a bike for a year, I'd say I was pretty much bike exclusive for a bit. But like you said earlier, it was because I was working at a dealership, so if I needed a car, it wasn't so much of an issue. But being on a bike definitely improved my quality of life, not spending so much time in traffic and not spending, I mean, even if I was to go on public transport, it would have taken me a much longer time. And it was fun, and going on rides and stuff is fun, and I think that's a big thing for bikers and car guys alike. I think if car guys want to have fun on the road, maybe bikes is something they should look into, because like we said, toy cars are more expensive, and cars just make such a good effort at commuting, but sometimes not the most playful.
Yeah, you have to have your head more switched on to own a bike, and if you're not about that, then I would not recommend getting one, because that's where I am at. I would like to try it, but I wouldn't want to go full commit and go and get my license and buy one myself straight away. So yeah, I'm not in that mindset, but I would definitely recommend it because it does look like a load of fun. And when I see like the onboard GoPros of Alex on his bike, I'm like, okay, yeah, that is pretty cool. But it doesn't really make sense for me. And to say the truth, they scare me a little bit, a lot. But I wouldn't say no to it. It's just it would have to be in the right. I'd have to be in the right mindset.
It's definitely something. Yeah, it's definitely something to bear in mind, because it is something you need to become comfortable with. I was definitely scared when I first started, and my dad was definitely scared about me getting on the road on a bike. And the danger has not gone anywhere. Yes, we're being positive about bikes. However, you've got to be so careful, because you've got to be careful about everyone else. It's, yes, you might be the best rider in the world, and yes, you might say, oh, blah, 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 and it doesn't happen to me, it doesn't happen to anyone. And yeah, you might be right, but on the road, at the end of the day, I have a lapse in concentration. Cameron has a lapse in concentration. It's everyone has a lapse in concentration. I try my best, and I think I've become a much better driver because I'm on a bike, and I try my best always to check my inside mirror, my left, when I'm turning right, to make sure no one's coming down the inside and all stuff like this. But if you've had a bad day, you've had a stressful day, it's very likely someone's not going to see you, and it's not time to get angry at them. And it's just something to always think about, and it can easily happen to anyone, cars or bikes.
Yeah,
just something to think about.
That's a very good point about not getting angry. Even myself, right? I get a bit mad on the road when someone does something, but especially when you're like driving home, like in the rush hour coming home, you've got to be expecting people to be stressed out and not 100% concentrating, and especially on a bike where, like, you can't expect people to see you. You can't. Like, you shouldn't be going around with the arrogance that people should hear you and see you and that sort of stuff, because it's really difficult, really difficult. So don't be that biker if you do get a bike.
Yeah, I mean, and it's something, it's impossible for someone to concentrate 100% on their drive home or the whole time, considering how much of a cocoon you are in a car.
Modern
Maybe you're going to
cars,
concentrate.
yeah.
Modern cars are such a cocoon to be in, and in that way, you're never going to be able to concentrate 100%.
Yeah, oh yeah, nowadays with everything, sat navs, Bluetooth, heated seats, climate control, like all these things that you've got at your disposal. Of course, every now and again you're just going to have a look down or whatever at it. So yeah, do take that into account. Basically, that's just for like, just cars v bikes in general. Don't be a dick.
And not that last point. I kept on thinking about it, but forgot to say it. In a car, when you flip someone off, more often than not, or if you shout swear words at them, more often than not, they're never going to hear you or know about it. In a bike, they can see every single action you do towards them. If you start flipping them off, if you start going like this, if you start getting rowdy, you've just got to try and remain calm and think, what you're going to achieve from that on that point. Not going too far into it, but just everyone's trying to get home. Everyone's trying to do this. Everyone's trying to do that.
Road rage is not worth it.
Anyway, move on from that. We don't want to go down that. That's another podcast.
And I'm going to say, for the 30 seconds or the 5 seconds of your beef, what's it worth?
Exactly. We've all got lives. We've all got people we want to go home to. But I mean, kind of took a little bit detour at the end there, but overall, I think that's pretty much sums it up. Really, I mean, there's definitely some positives, some negatives, and I mean, I suppose we come across as that they are very good as a toy, and they can be practical in their own way. But a car's just such a good bloody invention, really, isn't it?
Yep, there's a reason why there are literally billions of cars. Obviously, there's probably billions of bikes as well, but there's a reason why there's cars just absolutely everywhere, and pretty much everyone in a fairly wealthy country has one, because they are just so useful. And bikes are just that little bit less useful, but then they're a little bit more playful, so it depends what you want. But that pretty much does conclude this podcast. Do give us your comments below on what your thoughts are. Try and keep it PG, because obviously we like both for different reasons, but we don't really know who's going to win, so have a little beef in the comments.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just sneak one last point in. In a lot of Asian countries, and like I said, Indonesia earlier, they are a people carrier. They're everything over there. A scooter does everything, and it's quite remarkable to see, because they are, it is the most efficient way of actual point A to B. If you actually numb it down to a level, you're not going to get better economy than a bike getting from point A to B, especially with the space that is in some of these cities.
Yeah, fundamental energy wise, yeah, but we'll talk about that in another podcast.
Yeah,
because that's actually a really interesting. That's got my ideas going. So.
We'll be going on forever otherwise. This is the problem that Cameron and I always have. So anyway, yeah, if you did like that, guys, I know it's just a bit of fun just talking about both of it. Hopefully you get a couple of ideas. Hopefully some of you are a little bit more interested in maybe going on the bike route, or some of you bike guys, if you are the one bike and bikes are the best, and sod cars, maybe give some of the more entertaining cars a go and see cars for the use that they are.
Yeah, indeed. But if you enjoyed this podcast, give it a like and subscribe. But that is it for HudRod Automotive Podcast. So we will see you in the next one.